African literature. In the domain of literature, during the pre-colonial period, this continent had a history of orature rather than literature. Here we see that in the pre-colonial period, Africa had a oral literature rather than a written literature. By the advent of British Empire to the African land, of course, they had started to translate Bible to African native languages, and they had started English education also in the African land. And after this one, the introduction of written literature were emerged. So, in the domain of literature, during the pre-colonial period, this continent had a history of orature rather than literature. So, the earlier days, Africa had a oral literature, not a written literature. Poetry of the period includes narrative epic, occupational verse, ritual verse, and praise poems to rulers and other prominent people. So, in the early days, before the colonial period, Africa, they had some oral forms of literature like ritual verse, praise songs to the rulers and other prominent people, narrative epic, folk tales, etc. So, of course, there prevailed a kind of rule, a kind of a tribal rule, and the inhabitants of the tribal community, they had these kinds of songs, folk tales, rituals, verse, narrative epic. The inhabitants of the tribal group, they had these kinds of oral forms in order to please their rulers and the prominent people in that tribe. Then the first one, the colonial period, began with the arrival of European powers in Africa via trade relationships and missionary activities. The missionaries translated Bible and the basic principles of Christianity into the native languages. So the arrival of Europeans arrived in the land of Africa via trade relationships and for missionary activities. Missionary activities means in order to propagate Christianity around the world. And the missionaries, Christian missionaries or European missionaries, they translated Bible and certain principles of Christianity into the native languages of Africa. This happened in colonial period. So there was a written document. Of course, with the advent of Europeans or in the colonial period, there were the emergence of written literature. Decolonization period. Decolonization period means the African inhabitants, they had an intention in their own minds to regain their freedom, to regain the freedom from the British Empire. Decolonization period. The colonized Africans appropriated English as well as French and demanded decolonization. Liberation, independence, and negritude were the significant themes of literature in English during this phase. Chinua Achebe showed the effects of colonialism among the tribal people of Africa in novels like Things Fall Apart and The Heir of God. So, in the decolonization period, of course, we see that the colonized African inhabitants, they had acquired English and French languages, and also they had started writing literatures or written literatures in their own languages and English language too. And of course, in their own writings, They wanted to regain the power of Africa. They wanted to regain the freedom or liberation of Africa. So, liberation, independence, and negritude were the significant themes of literature during the decolonization period. And Chinua Achebe, in his novels like Things Fall Apart and The Heir of God, he had shown the effects of colonialism or the effects of colonialism, the bad effects of colonialism among the tribal people of Africa. So the colonialism or the British Empire, with the support of the tribal monopoly in African societies, they had imposed a lot of clutches rules in the African society. Then post-colonization period. African writers started writings both the Western and native languages. The writings of this period observed 7 conflicts as the central theme of the literature. So in the post-colonization period, the African society, they started writing both in Western and in their own native languages, in their own African languages. So the writings of this period observed 7 conflicts as the central theme of literature. So the literature during this period included these 7 themes or these 7 conflicts, or the works which were written during this period, and its main theme is these 7 conflicts. You see the clash between Africa's past and present, tradition and modernity, indigenous and foreign. Here we see that soon after the liberation or soon after the Africa received freedom from the colonial empire, the African society, they had been modernized a lot. But certain inhabitants of Africa or certain writers and poets, they wanted to have the past glory of Africa. They wanted to have the prevail of the past glory of Africa in the society. But some other sections of the society, they wanted to have the modern atmosphere or modern attitude. So Africa's past and present, tradition and modernity, ingenious and foreign, these are all can be seen in the African writings written after the colonization. And individualism and community, socialism and capitalism, development and self-reliance, Africanity and humanity. So Hol Soyinka, the first post-independence African writer who received Nobel Prize for Literature in 1986. The famished road, Booker-winning novel by Ben Okri, represented the social and political turmoil of an African nation. So in the book Famished Road by Ben Okri, the Booker-winning novel Famished Road, Okri represented the social and political turmoil, the social and political conflict of African nation. The social and political chaos, social and political instability of African nation. Gabriel Okara deals with the cultural tensions resulting from the meeting of ancient culture of Africa with the modern Western culture in his poem such as Once Upon a Time. So there is missing of some words, sorry for that. In his poems such as Once Upon a Time. So Gabriel Imamotimi Okara, his poem Once Upon a Time, there we see that the meeting of ancient culture of Africa with the modern Western culture. So here in this poem, Once Upon a Time, the father addresses the son and he says to the son, I wanted to be what I used to be when I was like you. I wanted to regain the past glory of Africa. It has been destroyed by the advent of modernism by the British Empire. Neither aspect of post-colonialism indicates a version of nativism, a return to native languages, giving up English language and culture. The diasporic writers means the African writers who had been settled in America, and in their own writings, we see that the diasporic attitude means they wanted to abandon writings in English language and they wanted to regain or they wanted to go back to the African languages or they wanted to go back to the African nativism. Neither aspect of post-colonialism indicates a version of nativism, a version of patriotism and return to native languages, giving up English language and culture. This can be seen, giving up English language and culture and back to nativism, back to patriotism. This can be seen in diasporic writing.